How's everybody doing?
Yeah.
Just keep everybody in prayer. I don't know who all got hit by the storms last night, but it was ugly. But I know it was like a couple miles north of Glenn Meredith's house. And I know Doug, he was chatting with me this morning. His parents' property got hit pretty hard. So they're out there helping clean up stuff. And they said it was kind of scary. Well, all right. Well, let's get into this stuff. What did we talk about last week? You remember where did we end up?
Esau's descendants.
Esau's descendants. And so now we're actually going to go back to Jacob and some of his descendants. And a very familiar story in chapter 37. So let's read parts of this, and then we'll kind of pick it apart here. I'm just going to read kind of the first part here, 1 through 4. It says, "Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back an evil report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a varicolored tunic. And his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him in peace." Whew. That starts off really good. What are some things in there that you first kind of see or question or?
He was a shepherd.
Okay. That's kind of an interesting and important thing maybe to keep in mind.
37:2, in Hebrew, what I'm reading is like, Joseph brought in like slanderous, evil saying about his own brother. It's not like report, it's slanderous in nature, but it's very evil in nature.
Yeah.
That might have triggered a lot of jealousy.
He was a tattletale.
Yeah. Tattletale. But so that is a common thing, but was it wrong for him to do that?
That's what I was going to say. Somebody's got to do it. Somebody has to be the integrity ranger there.
You gotta read what you saw, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
sin is dangerous. Slanderous is like, it's like a character assassination. It's almost close to a murder.
Yeah. I mean, whatever he reported, it was ugly. So apparently it needed to be reported for correction's sake, possibly. But who were the brothers out there at this time?
Father's wives, children.
Yeah, the concubine ones. It wasn't Leah's or Rachel's. It was the concubines only. And you know that they were already had some issues going on with the whole hierarchy and whose children was whose and all this other kind of stuff. And now you have Joseph, the youngest one, coming out next to the other one, and so he starts tattletelling on everybody. Not only is he tattletelling, but then what does his father do?
He prefers him. He calls him up higher than the others.
Yeah, and he made him this coat, this robe.
Added fuel.
He rewarded him.
He added fuel to it.
Yeah. I mean, this wasn't just any robe. This was like a robe of royalty. And so by him doing this to Joseph, he just tattletaled on him, then he elevates him above them, and it just makes them so mad.
Mama always looked at us.
Man,
Don't smother his brothers.
oh yeah, I forgot all about them.
Well, it's also like the younger, more aggressive, mouthy kid, the youngest in the family, and everybody wants him to shut up because he talks too much. I knew a family that had 5 boys, and they had one like that who was very young, and they finally duct taped him to a blanket, to a mattress, and put duct tape over his mouth, and said, "I'll just stay there and shut up for a while." I thought it was a little strong, but a young brash child, and Joseph needed to be trained away from it. God worked on him hard, long and hard for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of back up a little bit, though, because I want to get back to the patriarchs Who are the patriarchs?
Abraham,
Isaac.
And Jacob. Why is Joseph not included in this list?
It's not through him.
Yeah, so the lineage isn't through him. 13 chapters are given to Joseph, just like Abraham. He's got a big story here.
Well, this is, I mean, I assume, I don't know, but I assume it's probably because of the situation and being, the Israelites being moved, how God protected them and all that, so. I mean, just like in Ruth, no. Esther, just like Esther, same thing, you know, it's just how God protected his people.
No, absolutely. Ultimately, we don't know, and I like those right there. The one thing that as you read through the story of Joseph, God never speaks to him personally.
This just proves it's bad that you always have 3 points.
But I do find it interesting that God never speaks to him. God is always indirectly working in his life through his faith, but he never does reveal himself to Joseph. Now, I can't really use that as an explanation because God reveals himself to Moses, and Moses isn't considered a patriarch, although he's high up. So ultimately, I don't know, but I do find it interesting because the story of Joseph to me, it kind of changes the narrative. It changes the story on how God is interacting with people at this point. Because before he was very direct, spoke to them, and it was off and on, but he still revealed himself and still spoke to them and gave them promises and blessings and all this kind of stuff. Now he stops that. And so now he's working just through his life, not directly on, like speaking over him.
Well, but he uses Joseph to answer to do what he promised to his father. Isaac, he gives him what he promised, but he doesn't require Isaac to do it. He does it through his youngest son.
Yeah, and really it's all about faith at this point, which is, I think, is very interesting because Joseph's life probably resembles more of our life on how we interact with God through our time. Because how many times have we hear audibly God's voice talking to us? Probably nobody here. I'm not saying he doesn't do that, so don't get me wrong. If it's happened to you, man, fantastic. But that is not the norm. So it's really by working through our faith, through our actions, we're actually going to see God move in all kinds of ways, even through the bad stuff.
well, I wonder if God wasn't talking directly to Joseph because his father was still alive. And maybe he was talking directly to the highest ranking member, because he gave Joseph a lot of dreams. So he was definitely communicating to him.
Yeah, I'm not saying he wasn't communicating. It was just different.
Yeah, well
Yeah.
said.
So what we're going to see is, and I find this very interesting because it starts off in verse 1, or actually verse 2. It says, "These are the generations of Jacob." And then it goes into talk about Joseph. So why does it say these are the generations of Jacob, but now we're going to focus on one kid?
Good question.
We've got some pretty big stories with this one kid.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much, even just in this one verse at the beginning about now Israel loved Joseph more than any other. I mean, and that was there for a reason for us to learn. This is like a really big deal. Don't do that.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of thing. So,
He's the only one who received the birthrights among all the 12.
He received the birthrights, did you
Yeah.
say?
You mean Jacob or Joseph?
Joseph. Because Reuben messed up, so he received the birthrights of Reuben.
So, but yeah, I mean, so keep in mind though, what I'm trying to get to on this question, even though this is Joseph's story, this is still Jacob's lineage. The promises that God gave Jacob are still in play here. Kind of like what was said earlier, all the promises that are coming from Jacob are going to come to pass, and it's going to be preserved through Joseph. So ultimately, I know this is a story about Joseph, but the story is still about Jacob at this time and his family.
It's kind of, this is what God did to protect their family. the family line. You know, it's almost like an introductory comment about here's what's gonna happen next. So he doesn't name them all. But another reason he doesn't name them all is because they almost have nothing to do with what he does through Jacob.
Yeah,
Or through
absolutely.
Joseph.
You know, and what we're going to kind of see through these next several stories is really the sovereignty of God and how God is going to work his way through all situations, even when we don't understand it, kind of a deal. So, you know, and I've heard the idea that Joseph is a picture of Jesus. Also, Joseph is a picture of Israel. So we'll kind of go through and pick those apart as we go along. Some of them are kind of interesting. So we'll, there's 12, 13 chapters we got to go through on that, but we'll get to them all. So anyway, so they're in the promised land, and Jacob fulfilled his promise. We talked about that last week by going back to where his father was, because that was all part of it. Jacob sends his son out to really kind of go make sure, check on the brothers. He comes back with a report. So really, it was kind of he was doing the will of his father, because that was kind of what he wanted him to do, keep tabs on everything, and he comes back with an evil. We don't know what they were doing. But when he comes back, he tells them the stuff. They don't like him. And then all of a sudden now he gets this robe, this mark of distinction that sets him above everybody else. And the brothers don't like it. And the very last part here, and he says, they could not speak to him in peace. I kind of had to stick on that one for a bit. What does that mean?
Mine says they couldn't speak a kind word to him.
Kind word to him.
And yet he loved them and protected them so much. They don't realize that they're castigating this brother who's going to basically save their bacon in an amazing way.
Yeah, only if they knew.
They don't eat bacon though, out there.
That's why I was saying that.
At this point, maybe. But no, so they couldn't even bring themselves to say, like, peace be with you, which is just a normal greeting that you would say to somebody. They couldn't say anything to him because of their hatred for him. So it's setting the stage up for what's to come and some reasons as to why they don't like him. But, in the meantime, Joseph doesn't help himself either. So let's get to this next part. 5, let's read, let's go 5 through 11. Who'd like to read that one?
I'll do it.
Okay, thanks.
Joseph had a dream. That's amazing. All this bad stuff happened, and then God gives Joseph a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the fields when suddenly my sheaf rose up and stood upright while your sheaf gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? They hated him all the more because of his dreams, what he had said. Then he had another dream. You want me to keep going?
Yes.
So he
11.
told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream. That made him happy. And this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to him. And he told his father as well as his brother. His father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you've had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now his brothers had gone. You want to stop?
Nope, you stop there. Yeah, perfect. Okay. What are some things that stand out to you on this? Your questions?
I can't help but to just kind of be delighted that God takes the lowest person in everyone's eyes and he openly tells everyone before it happens, this is what's going to happen. And everyone else is so, I feel bad for them because they're so angry, so envious, so jealous. Instead of working together, like they totally missed the bus. Joseph never throws them under. And I can't just get over it how God uses that model again and again and again. And it's always the little guy that ends up on top, so.
Absolutely. That's good. What else?
Well, that he would give him a dream that the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to him. You don't hear Joseph's attitude when he says that. He may not necessarily have been saying in a sarcastic way, this is what I. And he's telling the brothers, you are going to be under the help and rule and protection of Joseph. And they hated it, but it was true. It's God revealing this plan, like she said, this amazing plan that you wouldn't expect. And they'll have to sit and listen to it, and they hate it, and then he does it. Which is incredible.
Anything else?
Well, Jacob didn't defend him to himself, but he's talking to Joseph. He said, you rebuked him, which is your favorite son. It's obvious. Yet he still had to feel like he needed to give him some guidance. And he was angry about him, this.
Absolutely. You know, and the one thing about Jacob, though, that last little part of 11, but his father kept that saying in mind. That was one difference than the brothers did. So Jacob at least had a little bit of understanding to go, I need to keep this in mind. Something's going on here that maybe I don't understand. So that's kind of a neat little insight that we get into about Jacob versus what his brothers took into.
Makes me think of when it says Mary pondered it in her heart.
Mm.
It kind of makes me think of, he's like, I need to remember this. It also kind of makes me laugh with Joseph. I'm like, maybe there are things the Lord shares with us that we don't need to tell in that moment, or certain people that we don't need to tell. I think there does need to be discretion on some things.
Well, let's get that. So was it wrong then for Jacob to share this? Because I've kind of, Joseph, thank you.
Kind of a bragging point here.
Well, it's so open to interpretation based on why he shared it. He could have shared it out of youthful exuberance.
Yeah.
You know, hey, I had this great dream, Dad. Or he could have said, I had this dream. You need to get mine. You know, he could have been impetuous as
Or
a
questioning,
teenager.
hey, Dad, I had this dream.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, so we don't know the intentions of Joseph. But here's what we know in hindsight. Had he not shared this with them, they would not have been able to put the dots together later on when it happens.
Yeah.
So it almost in my mind, think of it in the longer span, he needed to share this because God is about sharing prophecy. He's not about necessarily withholding 100% of it. There's things he just doesn't share, but he does share enough because he wants you to connect the dots. And this is what Joseph was doing, in my opinion. Still probably, I don't know how it came across, you know, probably could have maybe have done it a little bit better, you know.
The way in which you share is huge.
No,
And certainly with
absolutely.
his parents, I'm just thinking, he's already kind of the favorite kid.
Yeah, but on the other side of that, he's only 17. So you can expect him to say a lot of pretty foolish things. He's saying this because he was a 17-year-old kid and it happened.
Yeah.
And look how it would have been a blessing to his father later on when he thought he was dead. He thought he'd been killed. And the brothers, when they thought the whole world was coming down upon them, they had to think back about his dream about the 11 stars and the sun and the moon. What did that mean? And if you're about to die, or your family's about to die, or you've been told your son is dead, all that's going to come back to you.
Absolutely.
Well, the cross references on the word kept, they kept referring to Mary, how she pondered it in her heart. And so his father may have initially been a little sharp with him, but then Jacob said, there's something about that boy.
Absolutely.
Oh, so at this point, Rachel is still alive, right?
No, I think she is actually dead by now.
Okay. But it seems to say that your mother and I.
That's a good question. Any thoughts on that?
Maybe she was alive, because I mean, it's not written in chronology, and maybe Benjamin was born later.
Yeah, so we don't know chronologically if she was or not. There's a lot of people who assume that Rachel and Leah were dead. And the reason they say that is because how Bilhah and Zilpah were actually referred to as wives. Because the word that they used for wives is the same word that they used for Rachel and Leah previously. So it is believed that once they passed, then they became elevated and became the actual wives. If we think that way, then those other brothers would have been elevated because now that's their mother who's now basically married to Jacob. And in essence, they should have been elevated too. So when they see Joseph being elevated above them, which is another reason why they may not have liked all that. So yeah, there's a lot going on here. That's a good catch.
16 that Rachel died as she gave birth. Then it's verse 16.
Yeah.
35.
Yeah, and there, when I was looking,
More like Bilhah got elevated, and I mean, he's only 17, so it's kind of like the stepmom.
Yeah.
So she kind of took charge of them. So it's probably more of the person who's in charge of them.
that's good.
That was his
It
nurse,
just-
right? That was his mom, the hand mom.
The handmaid, yeah. Mhm.
So in Hebrew, it's like Vayam, like that's like a mother. It's not thy mother like in English.
Well, actually, he had multiple wives, so
Yeah,
it's like.
he had multiple wives, so one of them.
But the status of being like mother was a big deal, versus being just a handmaid.
Yeah, but the whole thing was Israel was Jacob. He was the one who made the decisions and picked who the ones that he loved the most. And they all knew that. They all knew that they were under his rule, and that must have been confusing.
Well, but they didn't necessarily have to abide by that because, Reuben tried to persuade all that. So even his own kids were like even trying to thwart things. And later on, we get into the next chapter, Judah even tries to thwart his dad. So just because of the hierarchy of all that stuff does not necessarily mean that that's how they operated and obeyed, I should say. Okay. I know it's very weird, this whole thing. But what we get through all of this, before we go into this next section, we always wonder as Christians, why does Israel act the way they do? Why do Jews act the way they do? Why are they this way? Why don't they get it? What? Have you not read Genesis? Because when you go through the stories of the 12, they are messed up. And they come from a messed up family.
Well, they don't have the indwelling of the Holy Spirit like we do to
To understanding and stuff.
And
But
you're thankful for Christ.
there's a generational thing that's happening within them. And so I think that this is kind of passed down through them. And they're just like this. Because we saw that with Abraham going into Isaac, going into Jacob. They had a chance not to do stuff, but their actions all followed the same way. So it's safe to assume that those same actions and same mentality is passed down to the Jewish generations. So it shouldn't shock us when they act a certain way or when they do things that we're like, what in the world are you doing? Why has God chosen you over anybody? Well, he's done it even though they've all were jacked up from the beginning.
Well, it's almost like God is saying, get ready for this. You're gonna have a couple of 1,000 years of this, so.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Okay, so he shares these two dreams. They don't like it. It's just, you can just feel the tension building within the family. Okay, so let's get to this next section, 12 through 17. Somebody like to read that?
Then his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem. Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come and I will send you to them. And he said to him, I will go. Then he said to him, go down and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock and bring word back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. A man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field, and the man asked him, what are you looking for? He said, I'm looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they are pasturing the flock. Then the man said, they have moved from here, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan.
Okay, what does Dothan mean?
Alabama.
That was a long trip for him. Means two wells. And Joseph is about to get intimate with one of them. So Shechem is about 50 miles from where they are currently, from where his dad was. That's a long haul to go after his brothers.
And apparently he was maybe by himself. I mean, that's
Yeah.
pretty young. I was kind of like, wow.
Yeah, very interesting how it kind of just lets them go. Kind of trust everything, and maybe they had a name for themselves and people left them alone. Yeah, I don't know. But the animals are still out there. So
Isn't that where they just massacred all the men? Jack 'em?
that's a good question. It probably is, yeah.
Yeah, well, let's go back to the.
Let's go back to this nice, fun place.
Yeah. Don't worry, there's a lot of sessions.
That's funny, yeah. All right, so he goes off, goes find out. I'm sure the brothers are trying to get away from him because like we know Jacob's going to send Joseph over. So let's try to go someplace where we can get away from him. So let's go on. Let's go 18 through 36. I know it's a little bit, but somebody want to read that, or you want me to?
I can do it.
Okay.
When they saw him from a distance, and before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Now then, come and let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say, a wild beast devoured him. Then let us see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard this and rescued him out of their hands and said, "Let us not take his life." Reuben further said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but do not lay hands on him, that he might rescue him out of their hands to restore him to his father." So it came about when Joseph reached his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the very colored tunic that was on him, and they took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty without any water in it. Then they sat down to eat a meal, and they raised their eyes and looked, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead, and with their camels bearing aromatic gum and balm and myrrh on their way to bring them down to Egypt. And so Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover his blood? Let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Then some Midianite traders passed by, so they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Thus they brought Joseph into Egypt. Now Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, so he tore his garments. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy's not there, it's for me, where am I to go?" So they took Joseph's tunic and slaughtered a male goat and dipped the tunic in the blood. And they sent the varicolored tunic and brought it to their father and said, "We found this. Please examine it to see whether it's your son's tunic or not." And then he examined it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." So Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned his son many days. Then all of his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "Surely I will go down to Sheol in mourning for my son." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard. Tune in next week.
And you don't even get that next week. It's the week after. All right. Very familiar story here. What are some things that have always stood out to you, or maybe some questions that you may have had any?
Sovereignty of God.
The sovereignty of God. His preeminence of everything that's going on. God's working mightily through this story, even as ugly as it is.
God didn't tell Joseph this part up front. I think that's one of the obvious questions I hear a lot of folks asking, like why? What would have happened if Joseph would have known that? What was the purpose in not telling Joseph that?
He would have gone to check on his brothers.
Yeah. There's reasons why God doesn't tell us things whenever he's doing something in our lives. Because he knows how we would react.
Also, it's not really faith. Your faith is not being grown. If you know what's coming, you know what's coming. It's not stepping out of faith.
Absolutely. And I believe all of this for Joseph was kind of a test also of his faith, because God was going to use him in a big way. And he needed him to have some faith. So, and he was testing him along the way as we get into 39 and then moving forward. So,
Well, this also could have been a very humbling experience for Joseph. I mean,
absolutely.
what did I ever do to you guys? You know, that and being sold into slavery after having been his father's favorite. And he lost that code, you know, he went from being Fifth Avenue to, you know, street vote.
Absolutely.
Just like Jesus. There's actually you have the Messiah. There's a tradition of the Messiah, son of Joseph, and the Messiah, son of David. And this is kind of the thing where it plays into. So I was curious Ryan, have you read anything about the dreams? Does that relate to the Messiah, son of Joseph at all?
You know, it's funny that no one said anything of that that I've read, but I was kind of pondering that, and I didn't go that route too much because I don't know, because it was to me it seemed like it was very specific to this story, but I don't know. It very well could be. I'd have to look a little bit more into that, but I do find it interesting. Go ahead.
Did anyone say anything about the man that he encountered?
Which man are you talking about?
Talk about the man in the field. That was kind of an odd.
Oh, no, they did not. Do you want to kind of add to that, or some things that you might have read?
Just that it's a possible Christophany, but I don't know that. But that was just some of the stuff I read.
Yeah, I don't know. We're not given enough for me to know and really make that claim. But I don't know. I didn't get into that, and none of the people that I've read actually went into that realm. So maybe something that we can look into. But there are a lot of similarities, though, in this story about Jesus and what Jesus went through. Jesus was sold for how much silver? It was 30. He was sold for 20. What happened to Joseph's clothes versus what happened to Jesus' clothes, and the blood, and it was torn from him and taken, and now he didn't die at this point, but in his father's eyes, he had passed away.
Well, there's also a lot of similarity between the mother of James and John, who goes to Jesus and says, I want you to put these boys at my right and left hand. And he said, do you know what you're asking me? And then he turned to the boys and said, are you serious? When they say, yeah, we can drink from the cup. There's just tremendous confusion and a lot of difficulty that's going to go on in their lives. And that's like what's happening here with Joseph. There's all kinds of problems. It's real simple to me. There's some simple.
Yeah. Well, and there's some very interesting things, though, in here, too, that we can kind of glean from, because one of the characters that kind of stands out to me is Reuben.
Reuben, I mean, he saw an opportunity to be elevated. He said, well, let's not kill the boy, and then I can go back and tell Dad I protected, But then his other brother,
Who's the other brother? Judah.
he said, Reuben's not here. I'm going to slide into his slot and not kill him, but we sold him into slavery, and in Egypt we can find him.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting seeing the two different brothers react, because if you remember, Reuben was the one that slept with his father's concubine. Jacob kind of put him off to the side and said, I'm going to deal with you later, basically. We know when that's going to come. But Reuben knows he's in trouble. And he's almost like, hey, this is a prime opportunity for me to save his favorite son. So I'm going to use this to try to help elevate myself back, possibly, which is why he kind of comes to the rescue of Joseph. Okay. So I can definitely see kind of that mentality. So you can still see themselves still trying to play this game of who's going to be like the heir or the next one in line. And that's kind of, they're fighting for it kind of a deal.
Well, that's
Yeah. And then you've got Judah comes out of nowhere, and he's like, you know what? Instead of us, let's profit off this deal. Let's actually just sell him. We'll take some money, and we don't kill our brother. I mean, he's our brother. Okay, so let's not just kill him. So let's just sell him. Like it's better. Well, and I find this very interesting because they threw Joseph in a well, and they're all eating just right. He's just over there. I can't imagine them hearing him possibly yelling from there, "Hey guys, I'm here. Hey guys, hey." Trying to get their attention to get him out of there. What a weird situation.
Yeah, well, and then, but obviously Reuben left because it said he returned and all this had transpired. So they don't know where to go or what was the
Don't know.
The voice of reason, like,
Yeah.
hey, we'll just torture him, but we'll get him out and give him back to dad. You know, like, at least let's keep our heads on.
You know, and it is kind of interesting because I don't know how close they are to the pit. I would imagine fairly close. Keep in mind, the next time they're going to be eating together, Joseph's going to be in a little different situation. Very interesting kind of dynamic that's going on here, because where he is, he's at the lowest of the low, literally. He's going to be at the highest of the high whenever this whole thing comes circle. So, kind of a neat little comparison there.
Well, if that well was there to serve the whole community, if you will, then they couldn't be camping right close. And so Reuben returned to the pit, which means he probably had to go a mile or two to check it out, check on Joseph. And
Yeah.
Where'd you go? The rapture.
Yeah. You know, again, I don't know. I think it's pretty interesting though. But then they sell him to this caravan, and they're heading to Egypt. And these are slave traders. A going rate for someone his age was 20 silvers, was what they have said. So they just sold him for a going rate, and then we're going to leave him on, and his blood is not on our hands.
So how much is about 20 shekels? So,
Like today?
well, just back then, like what would it,
Yeah, I don't know.
you know, like,
That's a lot of money.
10 goats or?
I read it on Fox News, in the Czech Republic, they just found a whole bunch of silver coins, and however many they found, it wasn't like too terribly much, but they said it was equivalent to like a royal person. So I wonder if it was similar to.
I'm sure it was
like, in the
significant.
lottery.
It wasn't just a.
Because now you got all these brothers are like, they've got all this money and they come back and it's like, hey, you know,
What happened?
yeah, your brother's gone, but you guys are showing up in Lambos
The going rate, it was one life of a slave, so it was 20 or 30 years of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, and something to keep in mind, they didn't just sin against their father. They sinned against God, because this was an heir of God that he said was going to be promised coming out of Jacob. And they just did something to this whole lineage, possibly on this lineage. So they not only sinned against Jacob, they sinned against God and his promises to come from here. Now they didn't know that, you know, in my opinion. So anyway, so we go through here. They sacrifice basically a male goat. They slaughter a male goat. I think it's pretty interesting. For food and for sacrifice, they dip the tunic in. They take it to their dad. He says, "Yep, he's."
The putridness of that sacrifice to God, like, they just betrayed their brother in the biggest way, and they sacrificed. Like, that doesn't even.
It reminds me of how Jacob deceived his father Isaac, and the history repeats now. His own kids are, deceiving him with the same thing, same approach.
Does yours translate to say they sacrificed, because mine said they killed?
They slaughtered.
They slaughtered,
That's
and,
the same
there's
language.
it's the same word they use for that. So I don't know if they use sacrifice, but they killed it in that kind of way.
It's interesting. It was the Lamb of God who was sacrificed to cover sin. And they slaughtered a male goat, which is the complete opposite.
Exactly.
And nobody can teach Jesus what he did.
That's exactly right. Absolutely.
But these brothers in concert do something, lie to their father. I mean, it's a total lack of responsibility. It's a absolute disgraceful, terrible thing they do, and they do it in union, in concert. Let's just get rid of it. They're avoiding responsibility. Boom.
That's always amazed me, just the heart that one of them was not at least like, hey,
Guys, this is wrong.
we are not doing this, they all together, and knowing how it was gonna hurt their dad. I mean, that's just.
And for all of them to keep a secret from Jacob, that's amazing, because it's typical that not everybody can keep a secret. There's somebody's gonna crack at some point.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
there's something God's purpose is fulfilled.
There's also that group mentality that, they say that solo, somebody won't do something, they compare them with somebody else and they empower each other. And you can only imagine that You got 11 of them, and then they're sitting there going, well, crap, if I stand up, they might throw me in the pit too. Like, if I go against them, like, their lives could have been dangerous. You don't know that one of them wasn't on the fence, but
They didn't say anything.
They stayed on, yeah, for whatever reason, they decided to sit where they were.
Yeah, but it's also interesting. Jacob had to see his father using 2 goats, and it only took 1 goat to win.
Well, you know, I mean, it's you know what in my mind it kind of shows just the depravity of how they have fallen, and I do think this is even a much bigger picture, just how mankind, the depravity of mankind, is just going, you know, far. I mean, if it happened within the 12 this early, okay, things aren't going to ever get better. Okay, I mean, there's this mentality out there that people are waiting for the world to get better, and they think that's what's going to usher in Jesus. No. Absolutely not. Okay. We see this from day one, that, you know, so it's just this spiraling effect.
Also, you have God's sovereign love for the Jews, no matter what. This is like, and it really is no matter what. They act like this, and he says, forever, I'm gonna love you forever.
Even when you jack things up, you know.
It shows our need for him.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we desperately need him.
Yeah. And you know what? It's kind of reassuring that, you know, he loves us. No matter what we do, he loves us. You know? And then the last verse here says, meanwhile, the Midianites sold him to Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard. So this is Potiphar. His name is translated as Pet Pa Ra, and Ra being the sun god. So we know kind of what's going on there. He is probably the second most powerful man in Egypt at this time. We will get more into him in chapter 39, because that is a very interesting character when you look at it.
What a way to meet your best friend.
Yeah.
Here, I see that, I mean, he's a captain guard of like eunuchs.
We'll get into that.
I got a question for you, maybe at some point here. On chapter 35. So this is talking about the deaths of Rachel and Isaac. She died when Benjamin was born,
Mhm.
but yet this story right here, it implies that Joseph doesn't know his brother Benjamin. So I'm assuming this occurred before chapter 35. You had talked about that.
Yeah, I would assume that, but yes, I don't know. You know, I'm very careful. Just because it's not listed doesn't,
Yeah,
you know, I'm careful to do that. So I don't know, but yes, it's very possible.
I guess he could have been born, but he just.
Wasn't around
They
him.
sold him. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Anything else in there you want to grab? So what are some lessons out of this that we can apply?
The other one we didn't talk about when we read is about Sheol. You mentioned Sheol.
I didn't go into that. Yeah.
Keep your mouth shut, even if you mess up, God will save you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, I mean, and Glenn brings up a question about Sheol. What is that? Why is this in here? What is he talking about? What were their thoughts back then? Sheol. Like when Jacob was mourning,
Verse 35.
verse 35, he goes, surely I will go down to Sheol in mourning for my son.
Sheol is a Hebrew word for, you know, like what do you call like Hades in Greek. So back in those times, it used to be like Sheol, and you have a positive side and negative side. The positive side is what Abraham's bosom. The other one is the torment side, where Jesus himself gives an example. Lazarus.
Yeah, Lazarus. Absolutely. Anybody want to add to that?
So my reference says, it can also refer in a more general way to the realm of the dead.
Yeah.
Where we're starting the part of spirits live inscription.
Yeah.
Sheol.
Which I think is interesting because they don't talk about heaven or living with God or that kind of mentality at this point. So it kind of gives you their idea on what they thought happened after death.
Yeah, and this may have just been a statement that, you know, I'm gonna die mourning for Joseph.
I like the phrase.
Yeah, I'm gonna mourn for him for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to,
I'm going down.
you know, it's referring to a specific place.
Well, it was like you were saying, it's the compartment, there's 2 sides, you have the faithful and the unfaithful, and so they knew that it was considered the center of the earth regardless, so it doesn't mean he thought it was going, you know, Abraham's bosom of the others. I kind of think my response to it, it's more just like,
More of it's
I'm
just
gonna
saying.
born until the day I die.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
a dramatic statement.
So she was an idiot.
And I took that morning, that it's such anguish that it would kill him.
Yeah.
You know, that it's
It hurt him so bad, yeah. Very possible. What else?
I would say there's a hyperlink here. We'll get into it with the Judah and Tamar, but when they present the robe to the father and they say, please identify whether or not this is your son's robe or not. It's like, hey, whose do these belong to? So we need to keep that in mind when we read the next story.
Yeah, there's a few things we need to keep in mind before we get into the next chapter, because when we get to the top 4 kids, Reuben being the firstborn, well, he's messed up when he slept with his father's concubine. You have Simeon and Levi. They messed up whenever they went out and killed everybody in Shechem. Then you have Judah, who's now next in line in his mind, okay, because everybody else messed up, so I've got to be the next guy here. And the gift of the tunic and favoritism for Joseph probably threatened that blessing, which is why he did what he did when he saw that. So it kind of gives a little reasoning as to why Judah was trying to get him out of the picture. And then we kind of get into this next story here. Very interesting story. A few things, though, to keep in mind, like for application purposes. Envy is never a good thing. Hatred is never a good thing. When we act out of those things, it never produces good fruit. So we need to keep in mind, do not, keep your hatred stifled. Get that taken care of quickly. Do not envy other people. I mean, it's part of the one person, the main 10 kind of a deal. We do not go and covet and be envious of anybody else. Okay, so I think these are some great lessons because we see kind of what it can lead to. So God puts all of us in different situations, all of us in different stages of life, and all these different aspects. We need to be fine with where we are.
Also, if God allows you to be thrown into a pit, there may be a pot of fire on the other side. It's almost God's way of dealing, blessing, and reconciling.
That's exactly right. There's something is going on in our lives that God is working in no matter what's going on. There's not one thing happening in this world that he's not working through. So keep that in mind as we go through things. And also, family members are going to mess you up. Okay? They just are. People are just around us, our closest people. They're not necessarily always on our side. And don't expect that. But we're going to have to be faithful with the Lord. All right. So now we're going to get into this very strange tale. He stops the story of Joseph. And then we start telling about this little incident with Judah. And it's very easy to just kind of skip this, but it is very big. Okay? So we'll kind of go through and what's going on. So let's read this. You're talking about a jacked up family. Okay. I'll read. I think I'm going to just go like 1 through 10 real quick, or 1 through 11. Now it happened at the time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adulamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. And he took her and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he named him Then she conceived again and bore a son, and she named him Onan. And she bore still another son, and she named him Shelah. And it was at Chezib that she bore him. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sights of Yahweh, so Yahweh put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform your duty as a brother-in-law to her, and raise up a seed for your brother. And Onan knew that the seed would not be his, and it happened that when he went into his brother's wife, he wasted it on the ground in order not to give seed to his brother. But what he did was displeasing to the sight of Yahweh. So he put him to death also. Then Judah said to the daughter-in-law Tamar, live as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought, I am afraid lest he also die like his brothers. So Tamar went and lived in her father's house. Okay. Very odd. What's going on here?
And what's the age of Judah at this time? Because, you know,
Don't know.
So,
At least.
What was the question?
How old was Judah roughly about this time?
Oh, no.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I have no idea. So, but what did Judah do something wrong here?
Yes.
What did he do?
Well, I mean, it's apparent too. Anytime you get where it says at that time Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside. That's language saying like, you know, that they're doing something wrong, because going down, it could be like north or a higher elevation or whatever. But a lot of times in the Bible where you see someone going down, it's kind of like a backsliding position. That's like, you know, when Jonah, when he was going away from God, right? He didn't want to hear it. He went down to the docks, right? He was going away from God, and that's kind of the implication here.
You hear that same with Dinah too, she went, trying to find it, she went down to the mountain.
Yeah.
It didn't really say he
Went out
married.
to see the next time.
but this is the very nature of man, like,
Mine says he took her as a wife.
I think it's just she was a Canaanite.
She was a Canaanite. It was a no-no
Yeah.
for you to intermarry, especially like with a Canaanite. So right off the bat, the word is telling us Judah was out of favor and being disobedient to the Lord. So he was doing something on his own. Okay? Don't know why. Maybe it was like he was just kind of fed up. I was ready to kind of move on with things. I would need my own family. Don't know. But now he takes 2 Canaanite women as wives. Yeah, and then he talks about having kids with one of them. He has 3 sons. Now, we've mentioned in class before, God is very particular about the bloodline. Have I remember saying this? This story is showing itself here. Because now Judah his heirs are no longer of pure blood. Because now they are Canaanite blood as well. They're mixed. And God is like saying, no ma'am, no sir, will not have this. But I find something very weird in this whole story. Because when you go through here and the kids start having kids, one of them, the first one was evil in the sight of God. So God just says, you're done. I'm out. And I don't know how it happened. Don't know if it's natural. Don't know if it's mystical. All we know is God took care of the situation. The second one spilled his seed, and God didn't like that either. But if they were mixed blood, God didn't like that he spilled his seed, then why was he mad?
Because he didn't fulfill his duty in their customs, right? Or he was obligated to do that.
Yeah, it's very odd to me because we know the bloodline is not going to kind of go down this direction. But yet God was still upset because he didn't do what he was supposed to do as a husband. Okay? And this whole idea of a brother taking on his wife, that was a custom they did back then. You fulfilled your older brother's duty in what he was the second son was mad about. He knew that this son wasn't going to be his. It was still going to be considered his brother's son. He goes, I don't want that. Because I want my son. I want to be the next line in heir in all this. So this is why I'm going to do this. And so I also think it was an evil thing in his heart that God also didn't like. It was the whole matter of how he was doing this. God's like, I'm upset about your attitude and your heart in this. You're no good. So God took care of that too. Yeah.
Do you know where Tamar is from? Like what is she?
looks like she's from Timnah.
Yeah.
And Timnah is a Edomite area, so
Yeah.
maybe she's Esau.
Yeah. It is believed that she's on the side of Esau's blood.
Okay, so it's weird how that the seed is preserved, right? Because Tamar is one of the women in Matthew's genealogy.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Peretz is from that's a lineage from Jesus, Jesus came from Peretz.
Yeah, we'll get to that. So Tamar is definitely in the line of the pure blood. Okay? To Dan's point. So the third son is not of age yet. And also, Judah's like, look, I don't know what's going on with this woman, but I'm going to kind of preserve my third son. So I'm just going to hold him over here. Tamar, here's what we're going to do. I need you to go back to your father until my youngest one is of age. We'll come get you, and then we'll take care of everything. And Tamar's like, okay, that's good. Very odd. Okay, so let's read on. So Tamar went and lived with her father. Let's go to in verse 12. And after a considerable time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. Then Judah was comforted, and he went up to his sheep shearer at Timnah, he and his friend Hira and the Adulamite. Then it was told to Tamar, behold, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she removed her widow's garment from herself and covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself. And she sat at the entrance of Anim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, and she had not been given to him as a wife. Then Judah saw her, and he thought she was a harlot, for she had covered her face. So he turned aside to her by the road and said, here now, let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give me that you may come into me? He said, therefore, I will send you a young goat from the flock. She said, moreover, will you give a pledge until you send it? Then he said, what pledge shall I give you? And she said, your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went, and she removed her veil from herself and put on her widow's garment. All right, we'll stop there for a second. Okay, very strange.
But this lady never went back to her own people. Rather, she stuck up with Judah's family. That's something resembles like Ruth in a way.
Her dedication to this family was amazing.
Yeah.
She kept her widow's clothes on this entire time. And she was waiting on this promise to be fulfilled by Jacob. Or Judah. I get all of them wrong. Sorry.
I was
By
just
Judah.
thinking Jacob, she did the same thing that he did, very clever, very shrewd in getting what she felt she was owed. Or indeed,
Yeah.
summarily owed.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, I mean, what she did was trickery. And she was just basically getting what was deserved to her. Was an heir. And Judah did not fulfill his obligation as her father-in-law. So, and we'll get to that part in just a second. So you kind of see where she's going in this, because she's like, look, he didn't fulfill it, because I see that the son is of age now where he should be my husband now. Someone comes in and tells her, hey, he's now going up over here. So then she comes up with this plan to go do this. Very, very deceiving, man. I mean, and she is shrewd. Not only does she just not get a goat, I want something very specific from you. And only something that he would have. Okay? Yeah, exactly.
Why is he offering a bit
Oh, yeah. Anything else in there before we move on to the rest of the story?
Well, I think it shows the lust of the flesh and just the effect of it and how it may last for generations, the problems it creates for the Jews, who I think it just shows amazingly, they're no better than anybody else. God's sovereign love doesn't change their dark heart.
Yeah, is this kind of in a contrast? Like Will was like, why Joseph? Why was maybe contrasting like, hey, this is what the other brothers were like. This is what was in their heart. This is what Joseph. I mean, we found some things that Joseph like. Why did he do the things?
And now we're just getting kind of another side of it.
This is a unique contrast of like two brothers here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because then it just jumps right back to Joseph, and he almost looks like he's definitely the good son to a certain degree. All right, let's finish reading this. Verse 20. Then Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adulamite, to take the pledge from the woman's hand. But he did not find her. So he asked the men of her place, saying, where is the cult prostitute who was by the road at Anem? But they said, there has been no cult prostitute here. So he returned to Judah and said, I did not find her. And furthermore, the men of the place said, there has not been a cult prostitute here. Then Judah said, let her keep them, lest we become a laughingstock. Behold, I sent this young goat, but you did not find her. Now it happened about 3 months later that it was told to Judah, saying, your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot, and behold, she is also with child by harlotry. Then Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. It was while she was being brought out that she sent to her father-in-law, saying, I am with child by the man to whom these things belong. And she said, please recognize this and see whose signet ring and cord and staff are these. And Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not know her again. We'll stop there.
That's strange, like, Jesus came from the same lineage. The same thing happened with Ruth.
Yeah.
Before and who's the other harlot, like from Joshua, etc. Rahab. Yeah.
Yeah.
All these lines, like Jesus came through these bloodlines. We might consider them as impure, but in God's eye, he has forgiven all those sins.
As bad of a story as this is, I mean, what was going on behind the scenes, it was just amazing. Because God was preserving the bloodline for the Messiah to come through all of this. Even as wicked as this might have been, the bloodline is what was important to God. And God made sure that these things happened to get to the bloodline of the Messiah, of what was to come. So God will use all bad situations for his glory, for his good, somehow, one way or the other. Okay?
I say this too, but without taking away from any of that, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. I mean, this woman, she was smart, she was cagey, she was tough, and God used her anyway. Hell hath no fury.
Yeah.
I think it's also incredible. God's providential hand is pretty much, there's a lot that blows me away about God, but the providence and being able to use fallen man, knowing what he's going to do, allowing him to do it, but still his will is accomplished. It's through that. It's just amazing to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and what I do find it very interesting in this is Judah's reaction to this. Is she was more righteous than I. So he kind of goes through a confession time period of recognizing what he had done wrong, confesses it, and then moves on and makes sure I will not have anything to do moving forward, and kind of repents of his situation.
And the maturity over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a reaction that God was kind of hoping to get out of Judah, to get to this point. So, he has been well taught here. Now, this last little section, 27, it says, now it happened at the time when she was giving birth that, behold, there were twins in her womb. And it happened while she was giving birth. One put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. And then it happened as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. So she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. So he was named Perez. Afterward, his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and he was named Zerah. So she has twins. One of them stuck its hand out first and said, I want the first-born blessing. Then she tied a cord around it. He's like, went right back into the womb. The other kid comes out first. Very odd. Okay. I want to know how many times someone has seen twins do something like that on a giving birth, So anyway, and actually when I did go through here, there are some people that believe that Tamar was a Shemite. That just somehow came down through the Shemite blood. We kind of talked about that. So it was all preserved. What I want to kind of point here, because I do find the contrast of Joseph and Judah very interesting, because these two heirs are going to be constantly at battle with one another as the storyline progresses through history. So to me, I think it's even bigger picture of why these two were contrasted right here. Because it's bigger than what we think. Anything else in here? So the big thing here and moving forward is divine providence of God. Because we're going to keep seeing that over and over again, especially with the story of Joseph.
Seems like that's such an obscure. It's very, very important, but it's like so random, like right in the middle of the story of Joseph. Now back to Joseph.
Now back to, yeah. No, yeah, I know. It's kind of odd. Anything else you want to add before we close up? All right, any prayer requests? Let's keep everybody affected by these storms in our prayers. And enjoy it. Just soak it in. Yeah, what an opportunity. Anything else? Well, all righty. Well, then let me close this.